present For the Record.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Fulton, and welcome to For the Record. Naomi Coles is away on assignment this week. Earlier this week, a late July-esque heat wave impacted millions of Americans. And we're not just talking about people, we're talking about animals and livestock. Now, I do want to warn you that some of the video that we show this morning and some of the conversations we have may be disturbing to some folks, but it's real and it's something that needs to be discussed. There's haunting video circulating around showing lines of dead cattle piled up, all due to record-breaking temperatures. And this morning, we're going to talk about how this happened, the impacts both economic and emotional, and a look at what comes next. Joining me first this morning is Pam Yankee, the fabulous farm babe herself. Pam, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you so much for coming in to join us this morning.
My pleasure.
You are arguably one of the best people to talk about our agriculture, the ins and outs. You've got your finger on the pulse of it day to day. Can we start at the very base level and explain the relationship that these farmers have with their livestock?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I do this for a living, talk about it, but I'm also a farm kid that grew up in dairy. So I have a real sense of what it feels like when these kinds of weather-related issues challenge our farmers and what they have to do really fast to try to take care of their livestock. So when it comes to, we were talking off camera about how weather is our lives in agriculture focus entirely on weather, whether you're livestock or whether you're crops. It doesn't really matter. If you've got a family outing, everything revolves around weather. So when we started to see this heat wave that was moving from the south up, a lot of Wisconsin farmers mobilized, and they do a lot of different things when it comes to trying to manage their way through. First, we get proactive early on and start making sure that we're even adjusting things like milking schedules. You don't want to be moving animals when it's the hottest part of the day if you don't have to. Now, let me give you a little perspective too. The average Holstein cow probably weighs anywhere, depending on the breed, from 800 to 1,200 pounds. The average body temperature of the cow naturally is about 102 degrees. So she's already wired a little warmer than even the human companions that are taking care of her. So we start right away with technology that we've got in our barns. It'll start with barn fans immediately. Most of our barn fans today are automatically triggered. We have sensors in the barn. When it gets to a certain temperature, things start turning on. The goal is to make sure that that cow, I'll use that as my reference point, that she's comfortable and is laying down and is eating. That's the other real challenge when it gets so hot. They don't want to eat. If she goes off her feed, then she's not going to be producing milk, and we also have reproductive issues. There's enough technology in the average farm today that we've even got Fitbits on a lot of our dairy cows. So we can tell, based on her walking pattern and some of those kinds of things, how stressed out she is, and is there anything that we can do to mitigate that. So barn fans are the first line of defense, and then many barns today are also equipped with automatic sprinkling systems. Now, the deal with when you're trying to work with sprinklers, as opposed to you and I running through a garden hose or something like that, the air dries us off. But when it comes to cattle, they have a hair coat, and the problem, if you wet them down, that hair coat seals them and keeps the heat in. So it does completely the opposite of what you'd want unless you bring in fans. So again, like I said, when you go into an average dairy farm, what you'll notice along the bottom of the floor, on the ground, is there may actually be dust rolling in that barn because you want the velocity of air moving in such a way that there's always a constant breeze. You might almost get shivers if you walk into the barn and they're doing it right, because the water will come down, that fan automatically hits the cowhide and keeps her cooled down. A dairy cow loves Wisconsin weather. This is one of the reasons why we're America's dairyland, because they really thrive when temperatures are at 42 degrees and below. When it's uncomfortable for us, she's pretty doggone happy. So that's why we have to work all the more quickly and effectively to get her cooled down. So those are just a couple of the technology tips.
And I love the blend there with technology and how, farming's so based in our roots here in Wisconsin. In fact, as a meteorologist, I have a very deep appreciation for how weather-connected folks are here in southern Wisconsin, right? And frankly, we were talking about this earlier off camera also. I really believe that stems from the fact that we have 4 seasons, and because so many of us have agricultural roots somewhere. Either we were raised on a farm, or we have family members who are farmers, or just taking a drive out in the Driftless area, you can see all the farms around. It's in our landscape. So you already talked a little bit about how farmers are so in tune to the forecast. Frankly, we know when a heat wave's coming. these farmers know they have to be proactive, as you just went through. Are there things that they can try to do to help the cattle and livestock even more with that fur coat or keeping them extra hydrated? What are things that they can do specifically for each cow?
Sure. Well, and the one thing that always kind of sticks in my head, and this is just something that as a farm kid you notice, people have this quest for cows out on the pasture. Love to see cows out on the pasture. You know what? So do I, when it's about 60 degrees outside. But if that's the only option, and some of our organic producers, by law, they have got to graze those animals a certain number of hours in a day to maintain their organic certification. Boy, that's a tough call. Farmers care very, very much about these animals, and do not be deceived. Although, you know, you say, oh, well, there's those big farms, they're just a number. No, they are not. That animal has an individual identity unique to all other animals on that farm. And that really, Dana, does not matter regardless of size. Now, she may not have, you know, we were talking about names, nicknames or something like that. She may be number 42, but in that farmer's mind and in that employees or that group of people that are handling those animals, number 42 has an identity. We know how old she is, when she had her last calf. Is she looking well today? Do we have to watch her in the milking? So there's still a lot of attention to detail to that individual animal to try to take care of it. Now, like I said, you want cows out on pasture? Well, you have to be very, very careful when you get the temperatures that we were experiencing. Cows will go to shade, but they all go to the shade. So then you have, you know, a group that isn't really helping themselves under the shade. They're doing what they can. So like I said, for farms that can provide shade, they do. Fans, they will. Water, constantly.
Has to be.
And clean water. Clean water. And even in the feed, when we're putting feed in the mangers, if there's anything we can do to keep that feed a little cooler to make it attractive to the palate, farmers will do that too. There is not a thing that I know Wisconsin farmers are skimping on when it comes to animal care. Because I'll tell you what, just talk with a farmer that's lost an animal because of heat stress or heat exhaustion, and they will literally tear up because they feel such a responsibility on what could I have done. And like you said, when you see temperatures compounded with the humidity we've got in Wisconsin, and maybe it is just, I'm out of time. A lot of farms have off-farm jobs. I can't be there. It just racks a family when you lose an animal.
And you brought up a great point about, I didn't realize, you know, with the organic cattle that there is a point where they have to have a certain amount of time out on the pasture. Is there, and this might be a really hard question to answer, is there a point of that we have nothing else we can do with these farmers? If they've tried so much and we hit that heat level, or are they going to continue to try whatever they can do?
I have seen, and I speak dairy, I apologize, but I speak dairy. I have seen farms spend thousands of dollars to keep an animal alive, thousands. I've seen veterinarians respond in the middle of the night. If you've got a cow that's panting, that's like the sign she's going down. And I've seen families bring ice bags to the barn, ice bags to that animal, bring a veterinarian that would literally start IVs in as many veins as they could to try to give that animal support. They do not spare the horses. And remember, anybody that's got an animal, you don't know what success you're going to have with that veterinarian, but the bill still comes due. And farmers do not spare the horses. Those animals are, like you said, part of the family. And again, don't get me going on big versus small. Every animal matters to that family, every animal, and you just don't want to lose one of them.
Absolutely. And we're going to put a pin in this. Thank you for the base there of what we're going off of. I want to continue this conversation actually in just a minute by looking a little bit into the future. I want to have a conversation about sustainable agriculture, but first let's look at the numbers. Is it actually getting warmer in southern Wisconsin, and is this an issue that we continue to discuss and need to discuss more? I'm going to dive into that data quite thoroughly right after this quick break. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Dana Fulton. I wanted to pause the conversation quickly with Pam Yonke to take a closer look at the data. A lot of times on the air, we use information from Climate Central. It's a nonprofit policy neutral organization that combines data from scientists all around the world, and having that unbiased opinion to look at the data is part of the reason we like using it so much. And when we put this up on the air, it's really clear and easy to see the trend. This is the information we were just talking about. Looking back at our average summer temperatures over the last 50 years, this drags us back to 1970. Notice the trend. We're seeing a trend and an increase in our average high temperatures. And farmers are concerned about this because that increase in temperature is absolutely affecting the livestock and the agriculture, just growth out of the ground. As far as warmer days, days above average, this is the other area of concern. Small increases in our temperatures overall, 1 to 2 degrees, might not sound a lot, but when we're looking at more days above average, that's when we're talking about the increase in those extreme conditions. And that's what's leading to more heartache for farmers and agriculturalists, and more of a pivot in how they're doing their practices. Since 1970, Madison alone has had 13 days above normal. Again, I know we like our poolside days when things are sunny and a little warmer outside, but we're talking almost 2 weeks worth of extreme heat conditions for us. And again, that goes back to changing our whole practices and looking at the conversation moving forward. Overall, summer temperatures across the country have generally been increasing. Southern Wisconsin included, again, in that 1 to 2 day range, but areas along the East Coast and certainly areas in the Deep South and along the West Coast seeing a greater increase in those heat trends. And that's an area, of course, well populated with farms and livestock concerns. So that's a quick look at some of this information. We're going to include it on channel3000.com if you want to dive into those numbers just a little bit more and to repeat it. But when we come back, we're going to take a closer look at sustainable agriculture in southern Wisconsin. Pam Jahnke will be returning to join us to continue the conversation. Welcome back, everyone. Pam Jahnke and I are now joined by Diane Mayerfeld, Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator with the UW-Madison Extensions. Diane, good morning.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off just a little bit with your background, specifically your background working with sustainable agriculture.
So it's been a bit of a winding road for me. I actually started out more in environmental resource management, and I have a master's degree in forestry and environmental studies. But by 1993, I was working on issues of pesticide use in agriculture, and then in the mid-90s, I started working with a program called Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, which is a U.S. Department of Agriculture program that's legally, set up by Congress, which is there to encourage research and education in sustainable agriculture.
So is this a new conversation then, or this is something that has been evolving and growing?
Well, so the SARE program, Sustainable Ag Research and Education, has been around since the mid-90s, or actually its predecessor started in the late 80s. And really, the conversation around sustainable agriculture goes back at least 100 years. For instance, at University of Wisconsin-Madison, there's a student program named F.H. King, which is named for a soils professor who worked right around 1900 and wrote a book that's well known in sustainable agriculture circles called Farmers of 40 Centuries, where he looked to China to see how one could farm for thousands of years without destroying the land that we need to grow our food. So that was perhaps at that time, it was perhaps a very minority concern, but there have been people who've been focusing on these questions of agricultural sustainability, as I say, for at least 100 years.
Interesting. And Pam, on the farm level, I imagine that's a conversation that you guys are also having of farmers trying to figure out how they can do this long term, correct?
Oh, well, like she said, this is part of our history.
Yeah.
I mean, since conservation has been something that I remember my grandfather his father talking about, so it's been part of the fabric of what we're doing in agriculture for our eternity. But our technology and the things that we're doing today are definitely different. We're mindful about what's changing with the climate, what's also changing with regard to our partners. I'm talking about the food companies that are saying to farmers, listen, tell me about your carbon footprint. If you are doing practices that we can get credit for on our carbon footprint plan, tell us about it. So that dialogue has turned into some meaningful conversations. Things that farmers have been doing are now suddenly becoming part of boardroom conversations. And those boardrooms are saying, hey, we got to go to the shareholders and tell them what we're doing to try to mitigate our carbon footprint. And the farmers are turning out to be their best friends because we've been doing this stuff already.
Right.
And we're doing, like I said, we're doing different things today. Cover crops has been going crazy in Wisconsin. Now, that's something when I was a kid, everybody had pastures. You walked the cows across the road to get to the pastures. But then we went to the corn bean rotation a little heavier. Now we're coming back and finding out about the improvement in soil tilth, water holding capacities, all of those kinds of things. So like I said, we recognize what practices work on our farm, and every farm is different, to her point about the diverse soils we've got in Wisconsin. Every farm is different, but every farmer is the best educator on what practices they should put in place on their farms. And like she said, University Extension has been a valuable partner saying, okay, here's a small plot of a bigger picture possibility, and that's helped to really expand farmers' horizons and also give them confidence to try some of these new projects or practices.
Wonderful. And I do want to really focus on the climate angle here and the change that is happening in our climate. Diane, would you be able to kind of expand on some of the internal conversations that might be happening in academia, and what are the things that the community is focused on when it comes to climate change in agriculture?
Pam referenced the interest of corporations in being able to take credit for their agricultural suppliers and the climate-friendly things they're doing. And specifically, there's a huge amount of interest in whether agriculture can actually be a net carbon storer. As you all know, what plants do and what agriculture is based on is plants take the energy from the sun and the carbon dioxide that's in the air, and they turn it into carbohydrates or sugars. And those sugars are the basis of our life, right? They build the plants, and then we eat the plants, so we're eating those carbohydrates that they photosynthesize. And this carbon cycle is a complicated equation. How much carbon dioxide plants are taking out of the air, and some of it gets stored in the plants, some of it gets eaten by animals and humans, and those animals then release carbon dioxide because we burn those carbohydrates for energy, and so it goes back into the air. But there's sort of a balancing point. Under certain conditions, plants take more carbon dioxide and turn it into more carbohydrates. Then the whole cycle then burns and releases back as carbon dioxide. And so that's where we want to get with agriculture. But unfortunately, a lot of our basic agricultural practices push that equation in the wrong direction. So what we want to do is we want to have the plants take up a lot of carbon dioxide and put it into the soil as carbon, feeding either dead plant material or their roots or the sugars that the plants give off through their roots. All of those are carbon-rich materials. But the things we do to our soils to make our agriculture work, to manage our weeds, and to do a lot of other things, a lot of those things, like the big example is tillage. Those things really encourage burning up of that, or respiring. Those things really act to reduce the amount of carbon that's stored in the soil. So really, cover crops and no-till, many other practices are the things that agriculture is looking at as things that we can tweak or we can change in big ways to make agriculture be a sector that is at least carbon neutral, maybe even potentially storing a little bit of carbon.
And that would be ideal. We were just looking at the data a second ago, our climate change impacted by that carbon cycle being disrupted. Diane, we have about 1 minute left, and I'm wondering if you could maybe narrow down one or two things. What does the future of farming look like in Wisconsin if we don't start adopting sustainable practices? How are things going to fall apart?
Well, specifically with climate, we are already seeing impacts, and they are just going to get much worse. So, we're the dairy state, and dairy cows are particularly susceptible to heat stress. They really like temperatures between 50 degrees and 65 degrees. A little cooler is good, a little bit warmer is good, but once you get into the mid 70s, they're already starting to get a little uncomfortable. So warmer days and especially warmer nights are really hard on them. And farmers are having to spend a lot more money on things like fans and sprinklers to keep their dairy cows comfortable enough so that they can stay healthy and provide milk.
And it's wonderful to hear you both echoing each other there, because it's across the platform, right? Folks working in the farm and folks working in academia and researching this a little bit more. Unfortunately, we're a little crunched for time, but I like that the driving point here is still there is a harmonious relationship at some point with agriculture in Wisconsin and reaching that carbon neutrality, that net neutrality limit. But it's going to take work. It's going to take folks working together and folks on both ends and consumers also to be aware of this. So Diane, Pam, thank you both so much for your time this morning. We'll be right back.